Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's lecture. I'm sorry that I cannot be there. Just bouncing everything around just made it challenging. So anyway, here doing week seven's content, sending it out to you early. Just remember that next week you have the midterm. So all the content that we've done in these first 7 weeks will be fair game. It shouldn't be something that's too difficult, but we won't have class. So you'll have that and I'll get that back graded to you ASAP. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk a little bit about interest, personality, and adjustment. So just kind of thinking through, we've talked a lot about different things. This is kind of our last night of testing and assessment stuff. When we get back from the midterm, we'll spend the rest of the semester talking about program evaluation. It's a little bit different, a little bit of a different focus, but we'll start off with some fun stuff and think through kind of how you'd use this. It really is this idea of program evaluation is the use of these measurement tools to actually look at and think about what's going on in programs, whether they're schools or whether wherever you actually may be doing them. So we'll deal with a little bit of that as we get into it. But right now we're going to get started on talking about this. So this one here, again, is maybe a little more appropriate to school counselors per se, but you'll also see some of this will be applicable to those of you who may be going on and doing different types of leadership roles or the others. How do you get at interest? What does personality measurement look like? And how does that impact maybe some decisions you're making? All right, let's see here. Struggling to find how to change it. All right, so interest inventories, they're looking across kind of what your types of interests may be. We'll start there. And there's a lot of this. This is based primarily in career work, where you're looking to see what kinds of things would you be most interested in, and what are the traits that actually align with that. So that way, maybe some of the positions or jobs you would go for might be more satisfying to you. I loved it. My son, who's in dental school, when he was in school, took one of these tests, and it said that he would be best at being a magician, which I always thought was pretty funny. But that's what these do. They're looking at different things about what you're doing, and some of those jobs or positions may have certain types of personalities that would be more likely to be most appropriate. They're not telling you what you're going to be, but it just gives you an opportunity to kind of see what might be most satisfying to me. And so it gives you kind of a hint of where you can look at and what kind of jobs might be something that you would align to. So they're based on self-reports, which we'll talk about some of the issues with that at the end. Self-reports mean that it's something that you're answering the questions. There's problems with that at times. We'll talk about it. It could predict. It's correlated with career satisfaction. If you tend to be someone who's does not like to perform or be out in front of people or do other things, you may not want to do take a job where you're presenting all over the place. That may not be satisfying to you. These are not really cognitive tests like some of the other stuff we're doing. Um, they're really more kind of what your preferences, where you lean, what kind of is more satisfying to you, what you'd identify with. It is pretty stable in the sense that what you take early on is probably similar to later on, but experience can change some of those interests as well. So let's look here. So there's a couple of different inventories. The most common one that has kind of been around forever is the strong interest inventory. It's used all the time in career counseling. I have it open here, one of these here. And this is, if you look in the thing, what I dropped in was an example for this person. It doesn't make any difference, but it talks about what you get, kind of the themes that you're going to get out of it, and specifically goes through kind of what each one of these kind of things are. We'll talk about this is actually, I don't know, they start with A there, but most other people call it RIASEC, which you'll see these are Holland. We'll talk about these in a minute. Our RIASEC that goes in to talk about each one of these types of things or themes that the items are aligned to kind of lean towards where you would fall into that. And it kind of tells how this person breaks down. So basically, this person identified interests that were greater in the artistic range, more realistic per se. We'll talk about what some of those things are and what they actually look like as we go back and forth. So just to be aware, that's kind of where these fall and how they fit. You can read through this. There's an analysis of kind of where you do the best, where this person did the best, and then it gives you some type of occupations that may align to that, where you'd be able to do some of these things. Sometimes they're not something that you would necessarily think of. Maybe you'd have to do a little bit of research on it. And I'll show you an assessment inventory that will you can take that will kind of help you think about some of your careers as well. So you can see here's some of the scales, some of the things that they actually do along those lines. Again, this is an analysis report. They do this. They still do this right now. You go to a career counselor, they're going to give you an assessment, certain number of items, and then they'll give you a report, and then you go in and talk about it and do some research, figure out what's most aligned to what you're doing, what interests you, maybe what pays enough for you to be able to do, and that's what you use. So it's called a strong interest inventory. And it's, like I said, it's very interesting, especially if you're stuck with trying to figure out things. A lot of students will do this in college or in high school as well. It's based on something that was done a long time ago by a gentleman by the name of Holland. And he created these types, these REASEC types. Realistic is these are our doers. They want physical, hands-on mechanical work. And these are kind of just general themes. Investigative, these are people who are thinkers, drawn to analytical, intellectual, or scientific tasks. Artistic, creators. There's the social, who are helpers, motivated by teaching, counseling, teamwork. Enterprising, they're persuaders, maybe sales, things along those lines. Conventional, these are really structured people who may want to, accountants or things along those lines. Now, with these, there's usually not one, like this is all this or all that. We're usually a combination of these. There's something about us and all of us. But if you really are a person who's an enterprising person who's really into the sales and really likes to be with people and finds a great deal of satisfaction of negotiating and talking with and being in large groups and this and that, and your job that you've pursued or you go into as an accountant sitting behind a computer screen all day crunching numbers in Excel, you might not have a great deal of satisfaction in your work. So that's what this does for you. It helps you kind of see where would you be most likely to find greater satisfaction. It's not going to tell you do this job. It's going to say here's the types of jobs that may be aligned to the personality or the things that you're most interested in. Okay. There's always a little bit of kind of bias in some of these, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So this is the Holland. There are measures of Holland, but that, like I said, the one we see the most is that strong interest inventory, which is based on Holland. Here's another kind of an example or a breakdown of that REASEC. That you see realistic people, maybe dentists, investigative, maybe, kind of health service researchers, conventional. These are biostatisticians. Your enterprising folks, public health planners, social, things along those lines. And then the artistic, you could be, again, you could be a communications specialist. That may not be something that you're thinking about, but you could do that kind of stuff. That may be more aligned with the creative, innovative things along those lines. So good way to think of this. We may use some of these, or you may see some of these results as well. You use it. So let's talk personality for a minute. So we went from kind of some of the traits that you have that are your interests. Let's talk about personality. Now, personality, literally, we're going to talk for 10 minutes about this. We could do a whole semester on this. There's tons of work around personality, lots and lots of personality assessments, lots of ways for us to think about how we measure personality. There's been problems early on. I mean, they used to have personality traits that were truly not personality, and it's tricky, and they're generalities, and nobody is a pure this or a pure that. And there's a lot of ways to slice and dice it. But there's value in doing some of those, specifically as you're managing or working with people. We'll talk about a few of these, but there's just so many. My colleagues at work right now use I can't remember what it's called right now, but they say I'm a 3, and I don't remember what that is. But there's all these different ways of thinking about personality. You may have even heard what your love language is. That's a similar type of thing. What types of things do you do based upon what you enjoy doing? These are the kind of personality assessments. They're looking at items that will help give you an idea of where you lean towards and how you approach things. So there's a few ways to do it. Psychodynamics, we'll talk about trait. There's a humanistic approach and there's a behavioral approach. These are all psychological terms that we do. And a lot of times they help in therapy. They really do, especially like maybe marital counseling. If you've got someone who's got a real strong personality in a certain way and someone who's really opposite of that, makes it hard for them to function. That also is very helpful in employment, building teams. Certain personalities work better with other personalities, and maybe teams need a little bit of a spread of personalities. You have all of one type and not all of the other, or any of the other. You may be missing some things and they may struggle. So, kind of helps. So, let's look at psychodynamic. We're not going to go crazy into this whole Freud and all the rest, but it really was based early on Freud's model of this id, ego, and superego. No, we're not talking about that, but it is there. They by and large do things that are projective in nature. And we've seen these, and I'll show you in a minute. The Rorschach, free association. There's a great scene. If we were in class, I'd show you the scene from What About Bob, where they're sitting in the car driving down the street, and a log, a dog, a frog as he's driving there. It's really funny. That's free association. And then the TIT, which is a thematic aptitudes test that you look at, and it's kind of different. So the problem is these are pretty low in reliability. So we've all seen this. It's a Rorschach test. These were done years ago in Switzerland by a guy, and there's I think 8 or 10 of these actual ink blot tests. These ink blots that they've tried to do validity studies on them. They're not great, but it's kind of what do you see? And if you see certain things, it ends up saying that you're a certain type of personality. What it's really trying to do is do something that's abstract and random, and what keeps coming up in your brain. And as the researcher, you're trying to kind of patch together what people are talking about. That's what these do. Not super reliable. I probably would not use them very much. Another one is the one that we call trait theories, which is very classic. We do this all the time. This NeoPER is one that's a classic psychological assessment that they use for personality. There's several traits here. These are all based upon the old DSMs, which was the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual from years and years ago. So things got like neuroticism, extroversion, openness, agreeableness, conscientiousness. They're there. They've been based on some research. They are pretty stable, meaning that they're stable over time, and there has been some validation on them. They work. You have to know how to interpret it. So this is an interesting. Here's a what one would look like. You give give this test, and you're going to take items that are associated with each one of these areas up here. So this is neuroticism. Here's the different things that may be on it. Here's your extroversion, and it talks about the items that are there, and then you'll get a score on each one of these. And so what they've done is this was a comparison. It doesn't matter. But basically what it's done is they've compared 3 different groups. These are people who never use drugs, current smoker, current marijuana user, and current cocaine and heroin user. And so these are people that this is how they scored on these particular items or items that are associated with this in the neuroticism scale. And here's how they actually scored overall on the test. The cocaine users tend to be highly more neurotic and be very low in conscientiousness. And if you can look it down here, competence, dutifulness, things along those lines. So this kind of helps, gives us an idea. We probably would be wanting someone who's never taken any drugs. They're a little more stable looking at some of these things. They're a little more agreeable and conscientious. They're lower in neuroticism than some of these other ones. Again, it is a tool that we might be able to use. Some people will give personality tests to people before they take a job. Police officers often will take these types of tests because we don't want someone who is kind of crazy. The biggest one is something called the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. It's given all the time. It's very trait-based. It's been around for a long time. They've done a lot of validity studies on it. I remember when my brother took this. Gosh, it was probably, oh gosh, probably about 40 years ago. I remember he took this. Yeah, because I was in my teens and he was trying to be a sheriff. And I remember him taking this. I remember him coming home and he said, yeah, it was a really weird test because it's true, false, and they will make statements and you basically say yes or no. And what they try to do is it's 550 questions and you go through and you answer these 550-ish, something like that. And you answer these questions and they'll be duplicative, meaning that you'll have the same type of question, but it'll be worded different or backwards or things along those lines to help to try to find people who are lying, people who are trying to game it and remember. And it becomes so monotonous that you end up actually being a little more truthful in the way that you answer because it's so long. Is reliable because of the length as well. But I remember them coming home and saying, these are the craziest questions. They're asking me questions like, would I ever walk up to a window and think about jumping out? That's what this is. So it's real, it's an interesting assessment. It's used all the time in clinical work. It's used in hiring and the rest of that kind of stuff. And interpretation is really difficult. There's whole courses on how to interpret the MMPI. There's books, there's interpret it's pretty tough. I've given it before and tried to do some interpretation. It's pretty hard. So this is the output. Don't worry about what it means, but you can kind of see as you go through the scores. This is a female, and this is how they actually scored across the different scales. It doesn't really matter what it is, but this is something that's used all the time, all the time. You got lice scales, you got case scales. There's a lot on there. Some of this stuff was controversial because early on, some of these subscales were measuring masculinity and femininity, and so they were trying to say that if you had more feminine traits, you were more likely to be gay. And this was from a long time ago. This is when that was. It's because they believed the DSM actually had in it that homosexuality was a psychological disorder. And this was so again, it's been around a long time. Some of it's kind of kooky, but now they've kind of cleaned this stuff up and it's way more valid in those areas. So it's interesting. Minnesota Multiphasic Inventory, the MMPI, literally. Behavioral approaches, there's a couple of different ways that we can do this as well. Usually these are done just by checklists and observations to see different ways that people approach these things. But they do well as they take into account context, meaning that context matters when you're talking about personality. Some people would say, I actually enjoy going into a room of people I know and going around and talking to people because that energizes me. But going into a room of people I don't know, I don't like to talk to people and I'll go sit down. So your context matters in your level of outgoingness or extroversion per se. And so there's an ability to be able to see some of those and how that context makes a difference in what you're actually doing. So behavioral approaches work pretty well in some of those as well. So there's issues with a lot of these personalities and achievement type things, not achievement, but the kind of interest inventories one of the biggest ones is this idea of social desirability. We are trying to look good. The best example of social desirability was the guy who did sex research back in the 30s. And for some reason, my brain is not working and I can't remember. So I'm forgetting and I'm going to have to remind myself here. But he did sex research and he walked door to door, sex researcher from the 30s. And it will come right up. And Kinsey, that's right, Alfred Kinsey. He would go knock door to door and he would talk to people about he would not, I want you to imagine this in the 30s now. This is not now, this is in the 30s, almost 100 years ago. Knock on the door, a woman comes to the door and you have a strange man at the door and he says, I want to ask you a few questions about sex. And they're like, what? They don't slam the door and they stay there. And then he asks them questions like, how often do you masturbate? Well, people are not gonna they don't want it. That sounds perverse to them. So we want to be liked, we want to be thought of as normal and the right. So you may not answer truthfully. And that is very much the case on these personality assessments. We do not want to seem crazy. We do not want to seem like there's a problem with us. So we tend to color our responses. And so that's why the MMPI is 550 questions. You may be able to color the first few, but it's going to be a lot harder to remember how you did it later on. And so that's why they're really long. Acquiescence, as they say, you just kind of give in, okay, yeah, I'll just do what you want me to do. And then the other one is lying. You're faking good or bad. You're saying you want to be perceived as better or worse. And so we call this response bias. If you're doing something that is the way you're responding is impacted by something, then that's bias, and that's not a good thing. So there is problems with self-report things because people will lie. They will say things that are not true. They'll try to make themselves look better. They'll try to get a certain type of score on this. I want to be perceived as an extrovert, so I'll mark all the ones that are making me extroverted. There's the Gallup Strengths Finder. You may want to be something else, so you go through and do those. There's just a lot of different types of tools that the more honest you take them, the more a true reflection of who you are and what you do. I took that Gallup Strength Finder long ago, which is really interesting. Gallup's is one, and they do it, and they give you certain things that are most associated with your own personality, and My number one thing is an activator, and an activator is someone who is a ready, fire, aim. If you've ever heard of that, I'm going. I'm going to do it. If people want to go, let's go. Let's do it. You want to start a new initiative? Let's try it. Let's figure it out. Let's go in. Let's go. Let's do. Let's do. Let's do. I tend to be one who starts a lot of stuff. I tend to be one who will. I've developed very, very large programs in the county and the state, and then just go and do. And then after, a couple of years, I go on to something else. Someone comes in and takes what I started and they make it better almost every time, almost every single time. It's not that what I did was bad. It's just that they may refine what I've done, take it, think more, whatever. But for me, just a doer. I'm going to go. I'm going to do. That's a personality trait, and that's identified through different assessments. And when I took it and was honest about it, that's what came up first for me. I'm an activator. I'm going to do. And there's good to that because of what I just said. There's also some bad things to that. Because if you and I are sitting in a meeting and we're on a team, and I say, here's what we want to be able to do, let's go. And you go, let's slow down for a minute. Let's really think this through. Let's stop and think, is this the best? That fires me up. And so I need to know how on a team, how I should respond to make sure that I know what I am, what is some of my personality traits and what I do and how that influences decisions that are happening. That's why these are beneficial. Anyway, kind of got off there. So nonetheless, here's some of the issues that you have with some of these types of tests that you're actually looking. So here's this. This is kind of a fun thing to do, and it's called human metrics. Human metrics is what it is, and it's something that's based on a Jung typology test, the Myers-Briggs typology test, which is kind of fun. You can kind of you can try to take the quiz. And so if you want to, let's see here, the one that's the more fun to the one that actually works, this Hyung height typology test is the one that you go into. So you go in there. I'm going to do that. And I have not done this forever, for a very long time. So we go to the test. And when you take it, here's where you're going to go through and you're going to answer all these questions. And there's a lot of them, 64 of them. Put in your age and your gender. It'll give you a score and it'll give you a certain personality type. So let's say that you get this ISTJ. Here's what it is. It's an introverted sensing, thinking, and judgment based upon how you responded. Tells you a little bit about who you are. Tells you a little bit about the types of jobs that you might like most. What are some of those areas? So nonetheless, kind of there's the career choices there. It should tell you you should be in management. Maybe these are some of the things that you can do. And then now, because of the way this is, it's trying to sell you everything, put you in degrees and whatever. It doesn't really matter. But it's just kind of a fun way to be able to look at a personality assessment that is really very much like the MMPI and the not the MMPI, but the Myers-Briggs type okay, I'm gonna stop. Myers-Briggs type indicator. And it's a typology test based on Carl Jung, who was a psychodynamic theorist from years ago. And these Myers and Briggs were two women who developed this. So it's actually pretty cool to be able to do that. You can take a look at it, and it's pretty brief and it's fun to take. So I encourage you to take a look at it. Uh, so when you're looking at this, it's what we just talked a little bit about this. Really, what you're using these for is to make sure that you're going to be in something that's going to fill your bucket in certain ways, make you feel like you're connected and have some sense of purpose in what you're actually doing. It's not going to be perfect. There's no perfect way to do these. There's no perfect job. There's always going to be frustrations, good parts, bad parts. That's just the way it is. But these will help. So if you're working with your own teenagers at home, you're working with some in school, there's a couple resources that you can actually do. Were we together, we would have done the human metrics test together, and we would have looked at our scores. We would have looked at some of those, and then what you do with kids when you do it is once they get their scores, they look at the different types of tests that are the different types of careers, and then they go into the Department of Labor's handbook on jobs, and they look to see the occupational handbook is what it's called. And they look to see what type of job it is and what it pays and all that. And then we have them go in and find a budget to kind of figure out how you'd be able to pay for your life if you did that job. But there's lots of application with this, tons of research along these lines. There's some in your book as well. And that's it for tonight. So again, I'm sorry that I wasn't able to be with you. I will see you all in 2 weeks, and hope you all have a great night.